And as I noticed, he attended Western Agricultural College. We used to play against you guys at sport. I went to Punchbowl Boys. But I think he was a few years before me. Mark was first elected as a Labor member for the federal seat of Werriwa in 1994, and he remained a member of Parliament until January of 2005. Mark was actually the federal leader of the opposition from 2003, so he was the leader of the Federal Labor Party from 2003 until 2005, and went up against John Howard in the 2004 federal election. He was actually ahead in polls, okay, but Johnny was Johnny. In recent years, he has become more concerned with the threats to free speech and freedom of religion, and he's actually spoken about this on a number of occasions. I myself have attended one of those talks, and I was actually very impressed with what Mark had to say, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted him to be one of the speakers at this rally, because he's a person who's been around the political scene for a long time, but he also understands the importance of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. So today won't be the first time he's discussed this issue in public, and I dare say won't be the last. So he's currently the New South Wales leader of One Nation, and is their lead candidate for the New South Wales Upper House in the coming state election. Besides all this, he is married with 3 children. So I trust that you'll agree that Mark is very well qualified to talk to us about what we can do in the political arena, because we've just heard from Asher as to why Christians, we need to be involved in the political arena. Greg's told us about the fact that we've got no protection, and if we don't do anything, okay, they're just going to squash us, okay, and take away our rights. So Mark will cover, okay, what can the normal person, you know, the little man, what can we do to do something about protecting our religious liberty and our rights to educate our children. Please welcome Mark Latham.
Thanks very much, Con. Indeed, a very big thank you to Con and the other organisers for bringing this rally together. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for turning out in such impressive numbers, because looking around the gathering here today, you're very indicative of the challenge we've got and why we're fighting so hard for the protection of religious freedom. Many people here today, indeed right across our country, came here on the basis they were trying to get away from attacks on their free speech. They were trying to get away from attacks on their religious freedom. And they came to Australia with the belief that this was a safe haven, a nation where Australians spoke their mind. You could say what you think about things, have a disagreement, and then have a couple of beers and a conversation about it afterwards. That was the Australian way. You could practice your religion without anyone telling you, no, that's wrong, or you're deficient, or you've got some problem because you have a certain Christian faith. Well, all of those things have got so many people, first and second generation migrants, saying to me and others on our side of politics, what's gone on in Australia, these problems, this repression has followed me here to Australia, what's happened in our country. And this is a very worrying trend. It's not the Australian way, it's not the country we want for our children and our grandchildren, and it's not a repression that we can tolerate for a single moment right here in Australia in 2019. Where has it come from? There are 2 sources of this movement from the left wing of politics. The first is that what we used to think of as economic Marxism in the old Soviet Union has morphed into cultural Marxism, where these cultural dietitians, these elites, these experts are wanting to control our feelings, our behaviour, our speech. That's the whole purpose of political correctness, to control language. And if you control someone's language, you control a huge part of their life, how they relate to other people, how they communicate, how they indeed belong in society. And the second source of this repression is to be found in human rights law. In Australia in the 50s and 60s there was a big movement for anti-discrimination, and it worked on the legal basis that certain so-called minority groups were given protection under the law. And I believe over the last 20 years Australia's become a great land of equal opportunity. Those protections have worked for the so-called minorities. Look at the gay community, for instance. They have a higher level of income, education, they got their same-sex marriage victory. Not that we supported it, but they had a celebration that day, and let's face it, every second person in the media is from the gay left group. They've got plenty of access in the media. So the truth is, they're a community that's got so much achievement, but instead of celebrating the achievement and dancing in the street as they might do, they have turned instead to say, no, we're going to launch a campaign of revenge against the people who we think 50 years ago tried to hold us back. And the human rights agenda now was never designed for this campaign of revenge. It was never designed for gay left activists to be attacking Christians simply for the reason that they believe in the Christian faith. This was not what the law was supposed to achieve in Australia, and it points to the need for a fundamental change in the law. I put forward a policy on behalf of One Nation in this election campaign that you don't have to be a defined so-called minority to get protection from discrimination in Australia. Everyone should have the protection, because quite frankly the new revenge campaign is directed at men, it's directed at white people, it's directed at Christians, it's directed to anyone essentially who's not like the left-wing activists, doesn't believe in what they believe in. And we can't allow this reign of terror in Australia to continue. The bottom line is no one in this country should feel uncomfortable for being a Christian. That's what the law should provide for. No one should feel uncomfortable for their valid religious beliefs. And there's three things that need to be done. We need to protect freedom of speech, someone like Israel Folau. We need to ensure there's no discrimination against anyone because of their Christian faith, similar to what they've tried and indeed what they did to Margaret Court in Western Australia. And the third area is that no one should be forced to do something they regard to be morally wrong. This is the protection for those who might be the dressmaker or the cake maker for a same-sex marriage wedding ceremony. We've got the terrible situation in New South Wales now under anti-discrimination law that if they refuse to participate they can be prosecuted in New South Wales. Well, that shouldn't be happening. If government has the power to make people do things they regard as morally wrong, we move one step closer to a police state. A police state, the sort of countries that many people were trying to escape from, to come to freedom in Australia. We've got to restore freedom through legislative changes for free speech and protection of religious freedom. Absolutely essential, and we need to fight for that, get people in the Parliament, people like myself and Greg, who will implement those laws in the next New South Wales Parliament so nobody is prosecuted for doing something that they believe to be morally wrong. The other thing we need to do, I see the signs about stop brainwashing our children, 100% correct, 100% correct. One of the reasons I'm running for Parliament is my youngest son came home one day from my old school, Hurlston, and said, we're studying safe schools. And I said, well, what's that about? And I went and looked at the curriculum and I read the background reading materials, and I couldn't believe what I was reading, because it wasn't about bullying. It was about a political campaign to make young people feel bad about themselves and rise up politically. It was a campaign to say you can be a boy one day, a girl the next, and a boy the next day. You can wear trousers one day, a dress one day, and then back to the trousers. Now, they talk about mental health for young people. If you want to make a young person mentally ill, confuse them about their gender at age 8 or 10 or 12 or 14. This is an evil campaign to try and use young people, confusing them about their identity, who they are, their sexuality, their gender, to try and make them become more political and rise up in society. And technically, safe schools has been defunded in New South Wales, but this gender fluidity stuff in the education system is elsewhere. It's in the health curriculum, it's even in the English curriculum, it's in personal development, it's in the story books, the library books in schools for children as young as 6 and 7. You couldn't have thought this was possible in Australia, that this would be happening. So all of that needs to be expunged from the education curriculum. And the other thing we need to do is to end what we call transgender self-identification. That's where a young person can turn up at school and say, I was a girl yesterday but I'm a boy today, and the school is supposed to say, oh okay, that's your decision, we all respect that. They should require medical evidence, specialist medical proof to say that this is the case. So it doesn't become a political campaign, a fad, where you've got schools having to give special treatment to young people who in fact haven't changed their gender, they've just swallowed the political propaganda and got confused about where they're headed. So we've announced a policy to end transgender self-identification and ensure that specialist medical advice is needed before the school recognises any change in gender. And in fact, you know, the amount of public stuff out there in the media and so forth about transgender is remarkable. The statistical truth is that Australia 3 years ago, when we had the census, there were 1,300 people who identified as transgender. but to listen to the left-wing media, I think there were 13 million. The amount of coverage this issue gets, it's plainly off the radar. So look, we need to bring it all back into proportion, and at the bottom line, what we're doing here, no matter if you're born in Australia or came from another country, what we're doing here is fighting for our Western civilisational values, for our Australian values, for the aspiration you and all your families had, that this would be a land of freedom, that this would be a country of equal opportunity. It's moved in a direction that I regard as very much un-Australian. We need to move it back to the Australian mainstream with some important law changes. You can only do that by changing the people in the Parliament. Change them in a fortnight's time at the state election, and then in May change them again at a federal level. And one bloke you should be changing is this Chris Bowen, who from the Labor Party has got no interest and commitment to any kind of freedom. He's one of the Labor Party people who's thought, oh, all these ethnic groups, they'll vote Labor, we'll just use them up and sack them into the branches, and they'll just be cannon fodder for our politics. The truth is, you need to represent the community. If the community didn't want same-sex marriage, that's how he should have voted in the Parliament. If the community wants freedom of religion, that's how he should vote in the Parliament. If the community wants to stop the brainwashing of our children, that's what he should be doing in the Parliament. He's not your representative if he's not listening to the people and acting on their wishes. So let's change the people in the Parliament, and on both sides, you know, you look at that Ruddock review, Greg mentioned it earlier on, that the same-sex marriage legislation was hopelessly deficient because it had no protection of religious freedom. Then they have the Ruddock review, and out of it, what do we get? Not a debate and implementation of religious freedom, another debate about the extension of gay rights in schools. I don't know why schools have got anything to do with sexuality. Oh, you don't bring your sexuality to school, bring your brain and learn. Bring your brain and learn. That's what you do at school. So this is a big turning point in our nation's history, in our state's history. We need to get back to Australian values of freedom and equality of opportunity. I thank you again for being here today in such good numbers. Spread the word, and let's get active on these election days to change the representatives, to get better community voice, better community action on behalf of your wishes, your values, your families. And I repeat that fundamental point: no one in Australia should ever feel uncomfortable for being a Christian. Thanks very much.
Thank you.